Hi Moritz, how are you?
Hello, from Berlin. Happy to be with you. It
Happy.
looks fantastic where you are.
Actually, we are almost in the same place. We're gonna have a white background here. You could be here in Brazil. Hopefully, you will someday.
Yeah, hopefully.
So, Moritz, I'm going to do a small introduction in Portuguese for everyone about you, and then you can start talking. Gente, mas basicamente, o Never Stop Learning chama muita atenção da gente via Offbeat, porque é um caso maravilhoso de uma marca de carro alemã que a gente não pode falar, mas começa com P, daqui a pouco ele vai contar. E o Moritz, ele tem essa consultoria maravilhosa que tem um olhar absolutamente inovador. E entender um pouquinho o que ele faz vai ser muito bacana. Moritz, I was just saying how much we admire your work. Lavinia showed you, and Ana Maria showed your work, and I think it's going to be great to understand a little bit of your view and specifically about this case. So the stage is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Conrado, and hey to everyone. Yeah, I was just smiling because it's the first time I ever got introduced on Portuguese, so I didn't get a word. But no, I'm really happy to be with you today. I'm really happy to share all the details about the case on Never Stop Learning. And just to give you an overview, what I'm going to talk about, I think it's in its core, it's three ideas that I want to discuss with you. So I'm not going to talk a lot about Forever Day One as a company. I'm not talking about myself, but only this case with this very famous German sports car manufacturer that I wanted to have with me here today, but unfortunately didn't get the allowance from their communications department. So I will speak of the big German sports car brand. But coming back to those three core ideas that I want to discuss with you today. Number one is that in our work with this sports car manufacturer, I think what stood out was that from the very first day onwards, we really challenged this idea of focusing on specific content when it comes to the idea of a learning organization, when it comes to also their re and upskilling, but instead try to shift a bit more towards change capabilities. And what this is and how we did it, I will show you in a second. So focus instead of specific content, specific skills on rather those horizontal skills and change capabilities. That's the first idea I want to discuss and share. The second one was that when you think and talk about the learning organization, let's leave this rather communicative campaign level and really dive into this idea of, okay, how can we create from a user and an employee perspective an experience of a learning organization, and how can we design this kind of experience and take rather holistic approach here and also a kind of a creative approach. And the third idea is that instead of focusing on the majority and trying to make it fit for everyone, we've really focused on the early adopters. And this idea of making small pilots, I think, is more and more the new normal here. But we also, I think, had really good ideas from the beginning onwards how we can then institutionalize and scale it from here. And so these are the core three kind of ideas I want to discuss with you that I think are interesting to share and to build on. So focusing on change capabilities instead only on the content and the specific skills, seeing a learning organization rather as an experience that I can design from a user perspective instead of a communication campaign. And the third one is to start with the early adopters, but have a clear idea of how to scale it and how to basically then institutionalize it from here. So let's dive into, and I directly basically set the scene here. So as you can imagine, as I think most car manufacturers right now, also this particular car manufacturer was in the middle of its transformation towards green mobility. They defined a new strategy 2030 where they really decided to move into green mobility and leave combustion engine behind them. And it's so easily said, right? But only if you're there in their production, factories and so on, you realize what a radical shift this is to them, right? Just think about it. If you call there at this car manufacturer or this car company, this brand, you hear a combustion engine going up, right? And everyone is kind of growing up in those towns where the factories are with this idea of once building combustion engines, and maybe their parents and their parents even did it. So the big history also to perfection also, which I think those brands make so standing out in the market. And now deciding to go into green mobility, going electromobility is really a radical skill shift for the organization. And by the way, not only for car manufacturers, we see this right now in many, many industries. If you look into, for example, energy industries, if you look into heating, for example, we have a lot of clients also here. It's really, we see this is becoming more and more the trend, right? That those radical shifts in value chains also lead to radical reskilling and upskilling demands. And that was the same also at this car manufacturer. And I'm pretty sure that you all do this, right? And that maybe also Rias, who spoke before me from EY, you reflect that in your people strategy. You go into skill management, try with a strategic workforce planning to analyze, okay, so how is the business shifting? What skills do we need? How many of these skills do we have already? How big is the gap? How do we fill it? So this work also has been done at Porsche. They went big into leadership development. How can we get our leaders on board? And they also invested massively into a learning ecosystem, built up courses and so on and so forth. But when we spoke to the people working at this car manufacturer, we basically realized that everything that you see here, right, those big ideas and initiatives and strategies on re and upskilling the people looked from a user perspective. So the perspective of the employees, a little bit like this metro map, of the underground in London, right? Because they had no idea where they were, right? Which station they are right now, which learning path, which career path they should take. And then also which, great learning offer from the learning ecosystem they could use. They were basically lost. And so we flipped this idea of a learning organization a bit around and said, okay, let's really think it radically from the user and ask, okay, so why is learning, why is changing so hard right now at the company? And why is it failing? And we ran interviews, we talked to people, and at the end of the day, we could always break it down to those three core elements. One was people were not really willing to change because they didn't understand why, right? I think that's a problem we know from school. Why do I have to learn this? Because it's the next page of the book. Isn't the best answer to that, right? So they didn't really know, weren't really willing to change. And some of them also maybe didn't really believe in themselves that they could change, that they could become, that they could take a new role in this new organization. The second one is that even though they may have wanted to change, they weren't really able. They didn't know where to start. They didn't know how to do it. I mean, the last time they learned was back at their apprenticeship or back at school or university. And since then, they never really had this idea of, okay, now I have to learn again. And how do I basically do it? What learning preferences, what learning strategies do I have? So that's the second element. And the third one was, actually, if you want it and you're able, you know how to learn, then actually to do it in your day-to-day work. And I think this is also where many people got lost because they said, we do not really have the time, we do not know how to do it, and we maybe even don't really want or believe in ourselves. So this was kind of the setup. And this is where we then started to tweak it around and say, okay, how can we make people better in changing, right? So starting with this question, are they actually really willing to change? How can we work on that? And the answers we found here was a lot in the context of growth mindset. How can we help people to, build certain beliefs and maybe also shift beliefs about themselves, their capabilities, what they're able to learn and what not? The second one, this are they actually able to change? Yeah, we can make people better in changing by helping them to maybe rediscover what learning is to them. And then also train that like a muscle. And the third element is actually doing it, which we basically translated into self-leadership in the sense of how can we help people to find the time in a completely busy workday? How can we help them build up new routines for learning and new habits that will help them, in small steps, change more and more in their career, in their day-to-day work. And just to give you a bit of more and a deeper understanding of what we understand, when it comes to curiosity and mindset, it's all about, how can we help people to be more open and curious about change? And here we talk a lot about growth mindset, but we made this, tangible by talking about this inner monologue that we have when we're confronted with something new. And just to give you an example, in the programs that we then later designed, we let people really in open courses with 150 people. We let people, build origami birds, with papers and let them just, think out loud what was going through their heads. And they were going, crazy. They were like, oh, my fingers are too thick. The manual, instructional manual is wrong. I was always bad at doing this kind of paperwork at school. I hate it. And then someone said in the call, I'm already done. And the half of the group have a nervous breakdown. And this is mindset, right? This inner voice that's talking to us. I think in a minute, it can talk up to 4,000 words to ourselves, whether we're able to do it, whether we're not, whether we should do it, whether we're not. And here we then bring in, science and also science by storytelling and try to show people, no, you can actually, can change that inner monologue. When it comes to learnability, the question is, what are my learning strategies? Am I effectively really learning? And here we discovered that many people, when we asked them, what is your learning strategy? They said, my learning strategy is marking a text. Right, which of course makes sense because that's what they learned as learning, for example, in university or back at school. But this is not the best way to learn a skill, for example. Right? It's a good way to learn certain content and know it maybe a week after in an exam, but that's not the kind of learning that we need. And I think here it was really interesting to see, also the deficit of people when it came to learning and their individual learning preferences, and then finding a matching learning strategy to that. And when it came to the self-leadership aspect, I said it already, it's all about how can I make time for that? And here we weren't, opposing the people by saying you are bad because you do not have the time and because you lose so much time on LinkedIn, YouTube, or whatever. No, we were rather shifting the narrative and saying, hey, to find focus in today's work and maybe even in this hybrid work setup is harder than ever before. And there are millions of people every day working, on interesting platforms, products to steal your attention. And what can you do actually to win back that time and to win back that focus and invest it what's really important to you? And this is all the aspect then of, how can I, work distraction free? How can I build, strong habits and routines around learning in my day-to-day work? And then the last bit, the organizational mindset part was, and how can I do this in a team? How can I, do this when there are people around me with a more, let's say, systemic perspective? Right. So these were the core muscles that we felt we need to train at this car manufacturer, if they want their people to change faster, if they want their people to grow into those new roles, which was super critical also because in Germany we have a very strong labor parties or a very strong unions, which in the end also forced a lot of companies to work with the people they have. So even if there would be other people, which also due to the demographic change we have here is not really the case. They have to find a way to work with those people they had. And we took those 4 competencies, these 4 kind of muscles, and translated them into a flagship program for the new learning organization at that car manufacturer, which was called the Online Learning Lab. And the idea was to, make this idea of a learning experience or learning organization tangible and let them experience this in a course of 6 + 6 weeks. So this training was really trying to integrate learning and getting better at it and getting better at growing very close into the day-to-day reality of the people. So this is why we didn't do a 2-day event, for example, but rather, broke it into 6 live sessions, for example, that were only 1.5 hours long. We helped the people to identify personal growth projects that were really critical to the projects they were working on right now, to show the relevance of learning and the direct impact, and that it's not something you do for in, 2 or 3 years. So if you look closer at the program, it's basically two ideas. The first one is this personal growth project. So we help people to scope the right learning project. So some people said my learning project is communication, right? Where this is something you can do for the rest of your life. So what exactly is it? Is it a feedback conversation? Is it an acquisition call? What is exactly the thing in communication you want to learn? So scoping it right. Then in the second step, it's about how do you learn best? Explore, learning preferences and then make a learning strategy. Discover the terrain around you. There is so much content out in the world. It's just a question of what works best with you. And also here we've found people who said, well, I always bought books because I felt everyone was doing that on LinkedIn. And I felt this is the best way I would learn. But then they realized, well, I only read one of those, half of the book. And the rest basically is now, the cupboard is basically wasted. So it's really about helping people to find the right learning project, to scope it right, to plan it right, and match it with a working learning strategy for them, and then to get into execution. And this was accompanied, and this is the second element, with those sessions you see on growth mindset, learnability, self-leadership. So just the elements you saw a minute ago, which we saw as boosters that help people get better in those learning projects. And then, of course, peer learning, social learning, where we mix people cross hierarchy, cross business units, because they were working all on completely different, personal growth projects. We had senior IT managers who were trying to learn a new cloud coding language, and we had other, people who wanted to learn how to lead a person if you do not really have the disciplinary responsibility. So we had many different growth projects, but they all had in common that they had this challenge of how can I get better at learning and getting better in this project in my day-to-day work. And this was super fruitful because they could, help each other out, discuss. And then we basically transferred this into the 6-week transfer, where they kept on going and working with those growth projects. And what is obvious is that in the end of the shift, to a, let's say, learning company isn't something you can only, make the individual responsible, right? We always say you have to meet halfway. So the individual needs to learn how to take more ownership and how to, become better in taking ownership for your career, for developing, for learning. But on the other hand side, also the organization, of course, has to change and give certain conditions that make it easier. And this brings me a bit, to my second idea. Remember the first one, which we just discovered, right? Instead of focusing, which would have been logical, right? To say, okay, we as this car producer, we focus only on electromobility and building, curriculums about that. And they said, no, this won't work. We already have so much content, so many trainings, that the problem lies somewhere else. It lies in this, ability to change and the willingness to change, and then actually the doing part. And this is why we focused rather on those change capabilities. And now the second idea is that instead of only focusing on those trainings, we really try to build a holistic change experience of this learning organization. And at its core, there's the employee, right, who should change in its beliefs, but also maybe behaviors on learning and personal growth in their day-to-day work. And instead of now just making a campaign around it and say, hey, we become a learning organization, we wanted to build an experience. And this starts with the first level, which is, of course, having a concrete reason why. And this is maybe a narrative, but this is also a leader who really knows how to translate the current transformation and shift into the day-to-day of an employee. So that in the end, the employee has a very good answer to the question, why should I change? Why should I learn this? The second element is, and this is, I think, something we already touched a bit, is, okay, if they are now willing, okay, how can we make them better at it? How can we help them to become better learners? How can we help them to become, how can we make it easier for them to grow into new roles, into new topics? The third element is, do they have role models, left and right of them, but also maybe top, the leaders, of course, who role well that behavior. And the fourth element is then the structures and processes that support it, right? And when it comes to this car manufacturer, we really try to work in all those 4 dimensions at the same time. That in the end of the day, from an employee perspective, there was this holistic and coherent, learning organization experience, step-by-step build up. And of course, you cannot do that, for the whole organization at once. And this is why we, as much as the car producer, sports car producer, decided to focus on those early adopters first, which I think makes total sense, right? Because the early and also the late majority, so let's say the majority of an organization is usually very cynical, right? So they will be very skeptical and will not do something if not somebody else has done it before them and liked it and enjoyed it and rated it positive. And these are usually those early adopters that we targeted also at the beginning. So we started by building this narrative with a future news narrative, also with the management board, build this kind of roadmap, how to become this learning organization, having all those 4 dimensions that I just shared with you in mind. And then we try to make it very fast, very tangible with this online learning lab as the flagship, and where we also got a lot of insights from the organization and also implemented this idea of it's not just the content-specific skills and trainings that are relevant. It's rather also this: how can we make people more adaptable and really bring in those change capabilities? And those flagship, they created a really big pull in the organization. So people wanted to become better at changing because they felt how much those changes affected their day-to-day work, and how much they got stretched and stressed by it. And so we rapidly built up a community. We, of course, integrated leadership with executive impulses, and step by step also with short formats such as their yearly reflection or those learning games that you may already do. We created a big buzz around this idea of #NeverStopLearning, which was the name of this kind of idea to become a learning organization. And now the interesting part is, how do you at that point stabilize it? How do you kind of also scale it and integrate it the majority? And I think the path we took here was to integrate those, change capabilities into the already existing training and learning development portfolio. So, for example, we integrated it into the management development. So there are courses now for managers how to become, ambassadors of growth mindset. What is mindset? How can I role model that to my team? But also, how can I become better in organizing that shift of skills in a team? We integrated into the apprenticeship model. So, if young people start at this car producer, they still learn one job at the beginning, but they also learn at the same time how to learn many jobs for the rest of the careers, because that's the reality they will face. It's no longer this idea of, I come, do my apprenticeship, have a job, and then I will do it for the rest of my life. No. You basically have to continue. And this is something we use to redesign this apprenticeship and career starter programs. And we also, at the end of the day, really found a way to integrate it into this 2030 strategy, where this idea of becoming a more adaptable workforce got a I think it was one kind of core pillar of the strategy. And so we are right now at the phase 3, I would say, where we are still in this integration and running, of course, also those programs, but are now trying to go one step further and really implement this into also the structures and processes. So, for example, making a growth project an integral part of development talks, making learning time an official thing in the organization, and step by step really integrate this idea of a learning organization at this car producer. And I want to end with a quote, which I think which describes in just a few words very much what I try to tell you today. It's from Yuval Harari, who said that the most flourishing skills in the 21st century are not the specific skills. It's more the skills of how to master new skills again and again. And I think what we really managed over the course of the last 2.5 years with this sports car manufacturer is to implement that idea that this model of just delivering knowledge isn't working any longer, and it's just too much. If you think about the depth of the implementation of the value chains and what people have to learn, it's still not enough just to bring in the content and to deliver the content. You have to get people into this knowledge-seeking mode, and therefore they have to become those people who can learn anything on the fly if you want so. And this, I think, is exactly what this quote says to me. And with that, I'm super curious to get some feedback from you, and I'm super curious to hear about your questions. Conrado, over to you.
Moritz, this was great. I mean, this is such an amazing event, and at the end to have all the explanation on the scales, it's very good, and it's connected to the way we think. So it was a thrill to see everything here. We have interesting and very applicable questions here. I have only 3 or 4 minutes, but I try to go to all of them. The first of all, where did they come from? They used to do traditional L&D. This project went in the beginning. Where are they, and where were they, and where are they now?
Well, I think they at the beginning were very much. I think they were doing everything, right? I mean, that's what I tried to show with this first slide. They had their people strategy. They had so many courses. They implemented, Degree. They had their learning ecosystem. I mean, it's a very profitable company, and that they were already spending a lot for learning and development. But I think just realized how much overwhelming it maybe was to the people, and that they weren't capable of dealing with this kind of change. And this is, I think, why we managed to refocus a bit the work of that L&D team towards not just bringing in more content and more training, which of course is important, but also rebalancing this with those rather change capabilities that I just introduced, which I think are the prerequisite. And today they even got, I think, so far, so whenever they build a reskilling program or something else like that, they integrate again and again those aspects of growth mindset, learnability, self-leadership, because in the end, these are the muscles that need to stay kind of trained, and where people basically need to stay fit in order to go those changes ahead.
Some specific questions about the early adopters. How did you choose them?
Can you repeat that?
The early adopters from the program. How did you manage to find which one should be starting
That's a good question. So in the end of the day, early adopters usually they out themselves by being committed or willed to do some extra effort, right? This is, I think, what differentiates them. I mean, if you take this law of diffusion, this innovation theory, early adopters are, for example, the Apple customers who camp one night before the official release of a new, iPhone in front of the Apple store, right? So this shows this extra effort. And in our case, we let people apply to the programs and ask them, what is it that you want to grow into? And they really had to, put some effort into it. And those were the people that we then, integrated. And I think that's important, because otherwise you had a lot of people who just want to, make sure that everything is right in that sense. And you just, do not want to miss something. But I think these are not the really committed people that you need at the beginning to build up such a movement as we did with #NeverStopLearning.
Very good. The final one, unfortunately, regarding if you use for the nudges and the post checks, how do you do that? How do you do that? I mean, if you have any specific applications or any theory behind it, were the nudges and the post checks?
You mean at the end of the program, right?
Yeah.
We usually try to really evaluate the progress the participants made in the project, in their personal growth project, because this is in the end what counts, right? And of course, we also do some kind of behavioral assessments before and after. But I think that's so good about the program, that you can make it so tangible, right? Because in the end, it's a question: did you basically complete your personal growth project? Did you your personal growth challenge? And can you prove that, right? And I think this is also the difference when it comes to just knowledge, delivery in a massive online open course, for example, where of course you can do multiple choice at the end. But when it comes to build up a skill, which I think is more and more the future and comes to the skills economy and so on, we also have to get more qualitative in the way we assess the progress. And so we were really looking into those projects and we're trying to evaluate the kind of the progress people made. And for example, this senior IT manager, he, for example, said that the biggest value for him in this online learning lab was that, for example, the cloud language he was coding, this is something that develops every day, right? And so at the end of the day, he said, of course, he could have joined a 2-day class somewhere, but a week later, the topic has shifted again and has moved again. And so he was super happy to build through this program a very stable routine in developing further in this, topic of cloud language coding. And I think this is what the program achieved, that it really helps people to make changing and career changes and learning a stable routine.
Well, it's very good. Thank you a lot for your time here. I will call you. I'll be in Berlin in September. Hopefully we could meet and talk a little bit more about all the good things you're doing over there. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.